Hello everyone, Memory here. So I've been missing in action for almost a month now, and I have to come clean that I wasn't making much Black Desert related content. Instead, as you can probably tell from the title of the thumbnail, I was actually messing around with Path of Exile. Now, there are some interesting things happened for me on Black Desert, but that happened after I finished doing most of the thing I wanted to do in Path of Exile. And I want to make my time on it somewhat productive so I can still kinda keep the habit of pumping out content sort of regularly. Yes, I'm trying. Therefore, I decided to make a Path of Exile video. I actually have never made a video on this game before, probably because this channel is predominantly a Black Desert channel, but more so the fact that I know too less about the game to constantly make decent content on it. However, this game is definitely one of those games that have a dear place in my heart because of the unparalleled amount of freedom on the character builds. So this video will mainly be about some of my builds that I managed to create as a casual Path of Exile player. I went from struggling to go through the campaign to being able to do red map content consistently in this journey. Now, when I first touched the game and I made my first character about 4 or 5 years ago, which was when the game just launched, I wanted to make my own build, not copying anyone else on the net, wanted to be the unique snowflake, and ended up being a total failure. Of course it's gonna end up being a total failure. There is even a saying in the Path of Exile community that we shall never talk about our first self-made character because, well, it's definitely going to be bad when you have next to no knowledge about the game. My first build was actually a lightning arrow ranger because I usually like to play range character in games. Bearing in mind that this was back in 2015 to 16ish, where getting any 5-link equipment is a big deal. Here I tried to replicate my piece of garbage build that I had together as close as possible for this video. This set of gear would probably be considered as god tier at the time, so I used a character that has no skill points allocated to balance things out. The idea of the build is making lightning arrow into a shotgun that hits about 20 targets if there are that many targets, of course. The 5th and 6th link on my armor is just some life and mana leech for some sustain, which I had on the skill tree, so you can treat this as a 4-link skill, which have the main purpose of clearing mob packs quickly. At least that was the goal. As for single targets, I use a burning arrow with 3 support gems that gives the most damage, and then using 3 herald auras for even more damage and the explode chain. With this build, I started to have trouble at around Act 6 because I started to get one-shotted by anything that touches me. Yes, I had barely any resistance, and if you played the game before, you'll know how important it is. And on top of that, I allocated nothing on life, energy shield, or anything that resembles a defensive stat. If you know anything about this game at all, you'll know that in this game, defensive mechanic is as important, if not more important than offensive stats, which means this character is basically dead. So yeah, since resetting a character is super expensive for me during that time, I ended up giving up on the build. Not much else to say here. My next build is a witch. This one is a lot more successful learning from my previous mistake. It is also a lot more enjoyable to play. The reason I made this build is because of a unique item that I happened to find. Bitter Dream Shadow Scepter. Basically, it makes the weapon into a 9-link equipment. Even though the skills are mostly level 1, it was still very powerful at the time, at least with the amount of budgets that I had anyways. What this build does is using Cold Snap on the scepter with elemental proliferation. Because of all the cold support skill on the scepter, it will freeze pretty much everything if they didn't already die from the skill damage. And if anything gets close to the freeze mob, they will also be frozen because of the proliferation effect. And of course, I've got the 3 herald auras again for my damage boost. As you can see, I'm in Act 9 now, and most of the things just explode when I point my mouse in their general direction. which is a big improvement compared to my first build. When it comes to the bosses, I have Flame Blast, hence the Megumin explosion. It deals a lot more damage than Cold Snap, and anything dies from it will leave a burning aura for a few seconds that also does a lot of damage. Now, Cold Snap doesn't usually freeze bosses, but if something else is frozen next to the boss will be frozen because of the proliferation effect. Pretty hilarious. This build is the only one that I finished Act 10 with for the first time. However, this is not the most reliable way to do bosses, especially when I finally reach the map stage of the game, and the difficulty is increasing rapidly. The main problem is Flame Blast will root you in place while you are charging it, so if you can't kill the enemy in 1 or 2 shots, things will get out of control very quickly. I couldn't even do tier 2 maps with this build most of the time, and there are 16 tiers in total. So I kinda have to think of something else if I want to progress further, but I couldn't because of the lack of knowledge that I had, so I admit defeat this time and copied someone else's Arc Trap build. That was the time when the lightning damage to the user effect on this Shimmeron's wand will not apply if you use traps. This unique wand gives a lot of damage because it will damage you whenever you crit as a downside. But since the downside did not affect trap users and you can equip 2 of them at the same time, it makes the trap build very cheap to make compared to other builds that has similar power levels. Of course, I made some twists and changes to suit my budget, so it is less powerful than what it can be. But this build still carried me to around tier 11 maps, which are the red maps. The idea of this build is to put the traps down, let them do damage while I focus on dodging damage or simply hide behind the walls. So even though I'm not exactly tanky, I can still survive in many dangerous situations. As you can see on the screen, the clear speed is fairly fast, you don't really get hit much, and burning bosses with flamethrowers and broken power lines is somewhat satisfying. There is just one small problem. I got bored of it. The main selling point of this game to me is the seemingly endless amount of possibilities. Although I can keep grinding to upgrade my gears and eventually reach tier 16 maps, but I'd rather grind in Black Desert because I still need to get that level 63. And in general, I don't like to grind the same thing over and over for a long time, so I decided to make another character. This time I made a Double Strike Slayer, a very mechanically simple character. The ones that I played so far are somewhat complicated as to how the character actually functions, so this time I made a simple character. Also, the ones that I had so far were all ranged, so this one is a melee. I wanted to play something else, something new, something that I usually wouldn't play. Also, a class that I haven't already played. There are 7 different characters in this game, and I've only touched 3 of them. So, Double Strike Duelist. All it does is jump on top of anything and just slash. As long as I don't die in one shot, my lifesteal will pretty much leech me back to full health almost instantly. That is about it. Okay, yeah, now I remember why I stopped playing this character, even though I did spend the most amount of resource on it at the time, mainly on the first 6-link item that this account acquired. It's pretty freaking boring. The only other kind of flashy thing is I can make 2 clones of myself also slashing very fast while I do bosses, which essentially triple my damage for a short duration. This character can do around T7 maps so far, but again, even though this build is able to scale up to tier 16, but it has even less fun value than the trap build, so no chance for me grinding on it for a long time. So let's have a look at my next creation. This time I want something that I can grind fast, so I can make more money to open up more viable builds that I can play from being able to afford some of the essential items for those builds. Most of the builds are dashed towards somewhere, do damage, and then dash to the next mob pack. So I thought, why not let my movement skill also kill the mobs? This thing is a ranger. It is actually the original ranger I had for my first lightning arrow build. How that happened was, this game from time to time will give all characters the opportunity to reset their entire skill tree. So I used this ranger to make the flicker strike build. Yes, it's a ranger using a sword. That is the kind of freedom I like about this game. And holy shit, it's fast. I knew it's going to be fast, but this kind of speed is way over my expectation, and also over the expectation of my CPU. Half of the time the FPS will drop significantly, or I will end up in places that I'm not supposed to be at and ended up teleporting back to somewhere else. But overall I rarely die from it, because if the character ever stops attacking, that means nothing else is alive around it. Otherwise it'll just keep jumping around the target. Okay, it's not jumping anymore, it's more like a spasm. The downside of this build though is that it's actually quite squishy, even though I tried my best to give her many layers of defense. However, as long as I don't die in one shot, I can usually leech the life back with a decent speed. But even with that, I still can't hit the red maps yet with this build. I did copy some parts of this build from several different people, mainly because I didn't know how to sustain the frenzy charges. I pieced them together along with some of my ideas, since I don't have enough currency to buy better gears at this stage if I do want to fully copy them. But this is good enough for me. The hilariously fast clear speed is enough to keep me entertained for a decent amount of time when I grind for my money. But eventually I got new ideas and I want to do something different again, so I went back to the drawing board thinking for a new build. But I'm gonna have to leave it till the next video, because I wasn't expecting this video is going for more than 20 minutes. However, the next few builds are as powerful, if not more powerful, than the ones you saw. So stay tuned for the next episode of Dragon. Anyways, that's it for today. Subscribe if you like it. Good luck on whatever RNG you're doing, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.